My husband returned from his exams with a young woman, of gentle appearance by his side. Within 3 months of entering the household, she had charmed my husband into divorcing me. On the day I left, she said arrogantly, "Now that you are a divorced woman, you are not entitled to take anything. That does not belong to you." I nodded. The treasures and antiques, passed down through generations. I took. The vast fortune, which I had earned. I took. The carriages, horses, and servants, whom I had hired. I took. In the end, my mother-in-law, facing a house reduced to its load-bearing walls, leaned on her cane and chased me for 10 miles. Daughter-in-law, take me with you. I had just fed my mother-in-law her medicine and helped her to bed. My personal maid, Xiao Tang, walked over to me and whispered, "Madam, your husband has returned." I put down the medicine bowl, and a hint of joy crept into my eyebrows. 3 months ago, my husband Li Xian went to the capital to take the imperial examinations. He was renowned for his talent, and this time he passed the examinations with flying colors. A few days ago, someone had already come to our home to congratulate us. Now that he has finally returned, how could I not be happy? However, when I turned around, I saw Xiao Tang frowning, hesitating for a moment before saying, "The master has returned, but, you'll see for yourself." I walked to the gate with a heavy heart. When I finally saw the person I had been longing for day and night, my heart sank to the bottom. After months of separation, Li Xian looked radiant with success, and in his arms was a beautiful woman with the face of a flower and the grace of the moon. In broad daylight, the two of them were flirting as if no one else existed. My gaze grew cold, but I maintained the dignity of a mistress and spoke softly. "Husband, who is this young lady?" Before I could finish speaking, the beauty let out a soft cry and hid behind her husband. "Li Lang, I'm scared." Li Xian immediately shielded her in his arms, furrowed his brows, and scolded me. "Yenner is delicate, don't scare her." He added, "Yenner is someone I met in the capital. Her heart is pure and kind. I have decided to marry her as my concubine. Go prepare the eastern courtyard. We will marry soon." Saying this, he didn't glance at me once more, but instead embraced Yenner and walked inside. Xiao Tang was furious. "You've been supporting his mother and managing the household for him. Now that he's gained power, he wants to take a concubine." I spit. What a despicable man. I remained calm, took a sip of tea, and asked, "Have you found any leads on the matter I asked you to investigate?" Xiao Tang finally remembered the matter at hand and hurriedly handed over several sheets of white paper. I glanced at them briefly. Yenner, whose full name is Lu Yunyan, was once the top courtesan at the Changyun Pavilion in the capital. Last year, several new girls arrived at the pavilion, whose beauty and talent surpassed hers. Knowing her youth was fading and having saved some silver, she decided to redeem herself and find a reliable man to marry. However, after years of entertaining nobles and officials in the brothel, her aspirations grew. Ordinary laborers were beneath her, and noble officials would never marry a prostitute. After much consideration, she eventually set her sights on a scholar preparing for the imperial examinations. She redeemed herself, hired an old woman to pose as her mother, and pretended to be a virtuous woman from a respectable family to get close to Li Xian. Before long, she had him completely under her spell. He even wanted to marry her as his concubine. However, her schemes were only enough to deceive Li Xian, who was so absorbed in his studies that he knew nothing of the outside world. I merely spent some silver to uncover all her secrets. Xiao Tang felt both indignant and a bit smug. "Miss, you must show these evidences to the young master. I don't believe he." A scholar. would want to marry a woman from a brothel. After thinking for a moment, she added, "If that doesn't work, we'll report it to the old lady. The old lady loves you the most. She will definitely protect you." Looking at the little maid's fierce expression, as if she wanted to devour Lu Yunyuan, I couldn't help but laugh. Xiao Tang curled her lips. "You're still laughing? That prostitute is about to climb over your head." I propped my chin on my hand and slowly said, "If she wants to snatch it, just give it to her. Why should I fight for it?" Xiao Tang's eyes widened in disbelief. "My aunt, what are you saying?" She was almost jumping out of her skin. "You've waited so long for your nephew to pass the imperial examination. Now that the peach is within your grasp, are you going to let someone else pick it?" Seeing her indignant expression, I couldn't help but sigh. Although Lu Yunyuan had used some tricks, she was ultimately just trying to secure a better future for herself. It was only human nature. On the other hand, Li Xian. My tone grew cold. "Xiao Tang, have you ever heard the saying? A wolf from Zhongshan, once in power, becomes arrogant." Li Xian came from a humble background. I, on the other hand, am the only daughter of a renowned merchant from Jiangnan, married to Xiao. After my parents passed away, the entire fortune was inherited by me. At the time, many of my uncles and cousins were eyeing the family fortune left by my parents. I was eager to marry into a family to protect this fortune. After searching everywhere, I settled on Li Xian, who was of low birth but had a reputation for talent. A low birth meant he was easy to control, and his reputation for talent meant he had a promising future. I believed I had made a wise investment. Yet, once he gained power, he revealed his true, treacherous nature. Such character and disposition are utterly unworthy of me. Xia Zhaoyan. Though I was born into a merchant family, I was raised with every possible indulgence. Anything that was soiled was simply discarded. To expend so much effort and scheme for a filthy man, and to fight to the death with Lu Yunyuan? Li Xian, you are unworthy. Seeing Xiao Tang's confusion, I explained patiently. In the end, Lu Yunyan was merely seeking a better future for herself. If Li Xian refused, could she force herself on him? People always say that women are promiscuous and seductive. But in my opinion, it is men who are greedy for beauty and forget their principles. With Li Xian's character, even if I were to remove Lu Yunyan, there would inevitably be another Chen Yunyan or Zhang Yunyan. Rather than waste our years in futile struggle, it would be better to withdraw early. My parents left me a fortune, hoping for a life of happiness and peace, not for me to be trapped in the inner quarters, filled with resentment. Why should I ruin myself for a man who doesn't love me? Xiao Tang listened in silence for a long time. After a while, she said, "Miss, you are right. It was I who was foolish and stubborn. I will go and call Li Xian right now and tell him that you want to divorce him." I hurriedly stopped her. As the saying goes, one should not fight against the authorities. If Li Xian were still the poor scholar he once was, divorce would be easy. But now he has achieved fame and fortune, and entering officialdom is only a matter of time. As a powerless merchant's daughter, I want a divorce but must also protect my family's assets. It's as difficult as climbing to the heavens. This matter can wait, let me plan carefully first. After thinking it over, I added, your mother-in-law has always been in poor health. Let's keep the matters of the household from her for now. I intended to step back, but Lu Yunyuan is pressing me relentlessly. On the third day after entering the mansion, she claimed her body was weak and needed more sunlight, forcing me to give her my courtyard. Better to avoid trouble. I relinquished it, but she only grew more brazen. Today she coveted the hairpin on my head, tomorrow she set her sights on the paintings in my room. Xiao Tang was so angry she rolled her eyes. She's just a woman from a brothel. With no shame. I've never seen such a greedy and shameless person. I smiled slightly. It's just a few pieces of jewelry. What's the harm in letting her have them? Besides, Lu Yunyan is only keeping them for me for a few days. I have my own ways to make her give them back. Xiao Tang, bring out 2 boxes of jewels from my storeroom. Also bring out the few pieces of shoe embroidery I acquired last month. Give them to Lu Yunyan so she can have some jewelry made and some bright new clothes sewn. Xiao Tang looked reluctant. I said, you can't catch a wolf without baiting it. Go on. Upon receiving the treasures, Lu Yunyan was indeed overjoyed. That very day, she summoned artisans to craft jewelry according to the latest fashion in the capital. The shoe embroideries were also made into garments. A poor person suddenly becoming wealthy cannot hide their true nature. Lu Yunyan, dressed in luxurious attire, paraded around the estate daily, inevitably drawing attention and prompting people to inquire about her noble origins. But I had already bribed a few tongues. Within half a month, the news that Li Xian, after passing the imperial examination, intended to abandon his wife spread far and wide. Not only that, but the Lu family was no pushover either. Shortly after entering the mansion, she had already taken over the clothes, jewelry, and courtyard of the original wife. Look at her. So glamorous on the outside, but inside she's as black as coal. Soon, the rumors of Li Xian's betrayal and Lu's greed and cruelty spread throughout the streets and alleys. Although Li Xian had passed the imperial examination, he had not yet been appointed to an official position and was awaiting selection. Once the rumors spread, the higher-ups immediately gave the position that had been intended for him to someone else. Upon hearing this, Li Xian's face turned dark. He returned to the mansion with a grim expression. Lu Yunyuan happened to be dressed up and came out to greet him. Husband. Today. Before she could finish, Li Xian slapped her hard across the face, sending her crashing to the ground. You worthless woman. You've ruined my plans. He ordered his men to strip Lu Yunyuan of her clothes and jewelry, along with everything she had taken from me in the past, and return it all to me. After all that, the items are back in my hands. However, I have a cleanliness obsession. Once something has been touched by someone else, I will never take it back. I heard that since the Lu family entered the mansion, they have often beaten and scolded the servants. I sighed lightly and said, it's not easy for the servants to make a living. Xiao Tang, distribute these things as rewards to them. Consider it compensation from me. Only money can move people's hearts. In contrast to Lu Yunyan, I appeared even more kind and generous. People have their own judgments. A woman of unknown origin who frequently beats and scolds others. A kind and generous matriarch who is generous with her wealth. It goes without saying which side the servants would be more loyal to. I don't even need to speak, over 100 pairs of eyes throughout the mansion will keep a watchful eye on Lu Yunyuan for me. The moment she makes the slightest mistake, those 100 tongues will immediately spread mocking words to the outside world. For a time, the vastly mansion seemed like a stage. Every word and deed of Li Xian and Lu Yunyan became the topic of conversation among the servants during their leisure hours. Rumors swirled. The official position that Li Xian had once thought was within his grasp remained uncertain. After suffering a setback, Lu Yunyan became more restrained. She no longer came to cause trouble for me every day but instead focused all her attention back on Li Xian, using every means at her disposal to flatter and please him. I, on the other hand, was happy to have some peace and quiet. During this time, I carefully inventoried all the items in the mansion's treasury and cross-checked the ledgers for the shops and properties. By the time the day of the divorce arrived, everything that belonged to me would be mine, and nothing would be left for Li Xian. Another half-month passed. Li Xian found me again and brought up the matter of marrying Lu Yunyuan as his concubine once more. You will handle all the wedding arrangements. Everything must be of the highest quality. Make sure that Yan Yan is married in style and with great fanfare. Li Xian spoke with an air of arrogance. I couldn't help but laugh inwardly. What a hypocrite! Before I married into the Li family, they were penniless. The only thing of value in the household was this old mansion passed down from our ancestors. Everything in the mansion was purchased with my dowry. Now he has the nerve to use my dowry to flaunt his wealth. I scoffed inwardly but feigned reluctance on the surface. The rumors outside have not yet died down. My husband has now taken Lu Shi as a concubine, and will probably be the subject of gossip again. Li Xian frowned, a trace of disdain flashing in his eyes. Throughout history, those who achieve great things have always had multiple wives and concubines. You're just a merchant's daughter, reeking of money. Marrying me is already a blessing for your ancestors. How dare you envy Yenner and defy me? Li Xian made no effort to hide his contempt, laying out his plans openly. I am destined for high office. I cannot allow a merchant's daughter to be my legitimate wife. I will divorce you sooner or later. If you are sensible, I might spare you the fate of a concubine. Otherwise, I will sell you to a brothel. What's so difficult about that? Hearing Li Xian's words, I hurriedly put on a panicked expression. My lord, please calm your anger. It is this servant who is ignorant and ungrateful. I looked anxious and uneasy. Since I married into this family, I've always been stubborn and unyielding because I had money. Now that Li Xian has finally humbled me, how could I not be delighted? Meanwhile, Lu Yunyuan couldn't help but show a hint of satisfaction. All her efforts to flatter Li Xian every day hadn't been in vain. What's a legitimate wife? She's just a pawn in his hands. I took in their expressions and couldn't help but curve my lips into a smile. My husband was right. Those who achieve great things, who among them doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines? I spoke slowly. I will order someone to find a few virtuous women from respectable families and send them to the inner courtyard. It would be good for my husband to expand his family. The two of them froze at the same time. Lu Yunyuan looked at me in disbelief. She had thought that I had come to my senses and agreed to let her be my co-wife. She didn't expect me to be so open-minded and want to take in more concubines. Li Xian was overjoyed, unable to hide the lewd look in his eyes. Good. Good. Leave this matter to you. My lady! You are truly the most virtuous and understanding wife. I sneered inwardly. A pure and virtuous woman from a good family? Does Li Xian, that lecher, deserve her? I secretly sent someone to redeem a few girls from a brothel. They must be beautiful, have sweet voices, and know some poetry and prose. After thinking it over, I added, if they have some unsavory past, that would be even better. I fabricated a pure background story for each of the girls, just as Lu Yunyuan had done back then. I then handed them all over to Li Xian. These women were all beautiful in their own way. Some seductive, some pure, some vibrant. Plus, since they were all from the same background as Lu Yunyuan, their schemes and tactics were equally cunning, and they soon began to compete fiercely. Li Xian enjoyed the blessings of having many wives, and he was overjoyed. As for the matter of taking a wife, he no longer mentioned it. After all, these beauties were all his favorite concubines, and taking one would inevitably make the others unhappy. He focused solely on being a master of balancing their affections. The concubines in the harem were all vying for his favor. I, on the other hand, was busy selling off any properties or shops I could. I exchanged them for silver notes and gold, which I hid in a secluded courtyard I had recently purchased. Once I had transferred most of my assets, Xiao Tang finally brought me some good news. The governor had returned with his family. He said he would stay until after the new year. Though my father was a merchant with little literary talent, he held scholars with literary prowess in high esteem. Therefore, he was generous and kind-hearted, often aiding impoverished scholars. The current governor was one of those whom my father had helped. After my father's death, he had also taken good care of me. However, Governor Yi was a strict man with a good reputation, and he was afraid of being labeled as colluding with merchants. Therefore, I did not dare to rely entirely on him. However, his only daughter, Yi Miaoqing, and I had known each other since childhood and were as close as sisters. Upon hearing the news, I immediately sent a visitation card to see her. My plan was already set, I only needed the final step. All I needed was for Miaoqing to give it a little push. And it would be enough. After spending half the day at the Yi mansion, I returned home with a face full of joy. Husband, I have some wonderful news to tell you. Oh, what good news? Li Xian looked at me eagerly. Ever since he found out about my close friendship with Yi Miaoqing, he had been urging me to go to the Yi mansion to help him secure a good position. Since he desired it so much, I naturally wanted to help him achieve his goal. I smiled broadly and said, Husband, you have great news to come. After meeting Miaoqing, I kept praising you. She is now 16. Just the right age for love to blossom. After hearing what I said, she has fallen deeply in love with you and will marry no one else. What? Li Xian's eyes lit up. The sudden good news left him dazed. Is this really true? I nodded with a smile. Of course it's true. Miaoqing is not only extremely beautiful, but she is also skilled in playing the qin, chess, calligraphy, and painting. Most importantly, she is the only daughter of the governor. Lord Yi loves her like a treasure. If you marry her, your future will be limitless. My flattery completely dazzled Li Xian. He couldn't wait to marry Yi Miaoqing right then and there. His mouth was almost split to his ears as he kept repeating, the governor's only daughter. The governor's only daughter. But suddenly, his voice trailed off. His gaze slowly settled on my face. The governor's daughter could never be a concubine. Zhao Nian. You. I know. With tears in my eyes, I said, Miaoqing is a woman of unparalleled virtue. She could never accept me as her equal. I know I am but a lowly merchant's daughter, unworthy of Li Lang. For your sake, let us part ways. As I spoke, tears of deep affection streamed down my face. I looked every inch the devoted woman willing to sacrifice herself for the one she loved. Zhao Nian. Li Xian couldn't help but be moved. He confessed with a loving gaze. Since you are so virtuous, I will not betray you. Once I marry Miss Yi as my main wife, I will find a mansion outside the city and take you as my concubine. I spit. Li Xian says he won't betray me. But on the day I was about to leave the mansion, he didn't give me a divorce decree, but a letter of repudiation. He avoided my gaze and said, since Miss Yi is so pure and virtuous, it's better for our relationship to end cleanly. He actually intended to humiliate his wife to please his new bride who hadn't even entered the door yet. Li Xian's schemes were so transparent they could be seen through. However, I didn't care much and continued to smile gracefully. Lu Yun Yuan, standing beside me, was beaming with joy. She was unaware of Yi Miaoqing's existence. She believed it was her own cunning that had made Li Xian completely change his mind, intending to divorce me and marry her as his legitimate wife. At that moment, she looked at me with a smug expression and said arrogantly, now that you're a discarded wife, then don't even think about taking anything that doesn't belong to you. Earlier, Li Xian had been wasting money recklessly, relying on my dowry to support him. Lu Yunyan had always believed that the Li family was a wealthy household. Otherwise, he wouldn't have looked at him in the capital city. Now was the time to reveal the truth. I smiled at her and said, Lu's sister, you have a point. What doesn't belong to me? I won't take a single thing. But then, what about what belongs to me? Can't I take that either? Before they could react, I waved my hand. Xiao Tang, take the servants and pack up all my belongings. At first, Lu Yunyan looked down on me and said, "You're truly the daughter of a merchant. Unworthy of respect. How petty and stingy you are." However, as she watched one load after another of gold and silver jewelry, antique treasures, silk brocades, furniture, and ornaments, even the bowls used to feed the dogs in the kitchen were not spared, Lu Yunyuan was stunned, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Xia Zhaonian, are you a bandit?" I was just smiling kindly. "Didn't I tell you? I will take everything that belongs to me." Lu Yunyuan was even more incredulous. "You mean everything in the house is yours?" She stopped mid-sentence, turned her head abruptly toward Li Xian, and said anxiously, "Husband, say something. Husband." Li Xian's face was as dark as the bottom of a pot. He gritted his teeth and said, "Xia Shi, what do you mean by this? Now that you've married into the Li family, everything you own naturally belongs to the Li family. What right do you have to take it away?" Facing Li Xian, I put on a different expression. I covered my face and wept pitifully. "Husband, it's not that I'm being stingy or unwilling to part with my wealth. You know Miaoqing's temperament. If she were to marry into this family and see these things I once used, she would surely feel resentful. That would only harm your marital harmony." Seeing that Li Xian was still hesitant, I added, "As the saying goes, 3 years as a clean magistrate earns 10,000 silver coins. Yi Bo is a second-rank governor. How much wealth must he have accumulated? As his only daughter, Miaoqing's dowry must be extremely generous. By then, you'll probably just look down on my things as crude and want to get rid of them as soon as possible." Hearing this, Li Xian's expression finally softened, and his desire was evident. He waved his hand impatiently and said, "Then hurry up and move your things out. Don't delay my wedding." That's exactly what I wanted to hear. Once Li Xian had spoken, Lu Yunyuan, no matter how much she ached, could say nothing more. So she could only watch helplessly as the once lavishly mansion was reduced to a bare shell. I looked around again. Oh, right. I almost forgot. This mansion was also rebuilt by my orders. But the house itself can't be moved. My smile grew even wider. Then tear down the walls, dismantle the doors, and remove the tiles. Oh, and crush the bricks underfoot as well. Thus, the house was reduced to nothing but a pile of rubble. Lu Yunyuan stood there speechless. I then addressed the servants. "By the way, your indentured contracts are all in my possession. Come with me. After all, there's no wages to be earned here." A large group of people left in a procession. Lu Yunyuan stared blankly at the ruins at her feet. Li Xian seemed to be comforting her, but also trying to reassure himself. He kept repeating, "It's okay. Once Yi Miaoqing marries in, our family will only rise higher." Suddenly, he spotted a figure darting past. Though the figure was hunched over and leaning on a cane, it moved as swiftly as lightning. As if afraid of being left behind, it rushed out the door with incredible speed. "Mother?" I was sitting in a carriage loaded with treasures, sharing my joy of escaping the bad man with Xiao Tang. Suddenly, I heard urgent cries coming from behind the carriage. "Daughter-in-law, take me with you. How can I live without you?" My frail and sickly mother-in-law, leaning on her cane, was moving swiftly. Her voice was heart-wrenching as she kept calling out to me. To be honest, although Li Xian was a good-for-nothing, his mother truly loved me. I left without a word and emptied the Li household. Thinking about it, I did owe the old lady an explanation. With this in mind, I hurriedly ordered the palanquin to stop and invited Mrs. Li inside. "Old lady, actually," I recounted everything that had happened over the past few days. I also showed her the divorce papers and emphasized that I would never go back. Upon hearing this, Mrs. Lee actually sighed in relief. She patted her chest and said with relief, "Thank goodness. You just don't want him anymore." "Not me." "Me?" Mrs. Lee continued. "You two can divorce. But I want to stay with you." I held my forehead. Though I had always known that Mrs. Lee's way of thinking was unconventional. At this moment, I couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. "You are Li Xian's biological mother." I emphasized the words biological mother. "If I were to take you away like this, Li Xian could report me to the authorities." "That makes sense," Mrs. Lee said. "I will take him to court and sever our mother-son relationship." Mrs. Lee's expression was calm. "I'll sue him for being unfilial." To be fair, Li Xian isn't exactly a filial son. A month before I married into the Lee family, Mrs. Lee caught a cold. It wasn't a serious illness, a few doses of medicine would have cured her. However, Li Xian took all the silver meant for Mrs. Lee's medicine and gambled it away. He watched his own mother grow weaker day by day. If it weren't for me marrying into the family and promptly arranging for medical treatment, Mrs. Lee would likely have passed away long ago. Since then, Mrs. Lee has lost all hope in him. She pretends to be ill every day. But in truth, she simply doesn't want to see this ungrateful son. "I'm afraid I won't be able to resist strangling him," Mrs. Lee said with a strong voice. Previously, because she was very satisfied with me, Mrs. Lee chose to overlook this good-for-nothing son. But upon learning how Li Xian had treated me, the last remnant of her concern vanished. Li's mother promptly took him to court. The outrageous things Li Xian had done were well known to everyone around him. Therefore, when Li's mother brought him before the authorities, a crowd stepped forward to testify. Filial disobedience is one of the 10 gravest sins, and those who commit it are unforgivable. Those who commit the 10 major crimes are executed on the spot, and the people would only cheer. However, Mrs. Lee's demand was merely to sever the mother-son relationship with Li Xian. Therefore, Li Xian's death sentence was commuted. But he could not escape punishment. The magistrate sentenced him to 50 lashes. Li Xian had never endured such suffering before. In the courtroom, he angrily declared, "Do you know who my future father-in-law is? It is none other than the esteemed second-rank provincial inspector, Yi Tianjing. Lord Yi, if you dare touch me today, I will repay you tenfold tomorrow." The prefect was startled and actually hesitated for a moment. He knew that Lord Yi had a beloved daughter whom he cherished like a precious jewel. If he really offended his future son-in-law, he would likely lose his position. The prefect was always cautious, so he hurriedly sent someone to the Yi mansion to inquire. The messenger returned and handed him a note. The words on the note were written with such force that they seemed to pierce the paper, revealing the anger of the writer. "Nonsense! Slandering this official and defaming my son, your crime is even greater." The prefect laughed. Yi Miaoqing would never fall in love with Li Xian. It was as unlikely as the moon falling in love with dog dung. That day, I went to find Yi Miaoqing and laid out my situation and plans. Divorcing Li Xian was easy, but preserving the family fortune afterward was difficult. The only solution was to make Li Xian believe that divorcing her would bring him immense benefits. He must be so eager that he would willingly give up his current interests. So I pleaded with Yi Miaoqing to let me use her name. She was a straightforward person with a sense of justice and readily agreed. But would Li Xian really believe it? Yi Miaoqing expressed some concern. "I have never met him before. And you claim he is deeply in love with you based on just a few words from you. That's too fake. How could that be possible?" I laughed. "Don't worry. He will definitely believe it. Even if it were the governor's only daughter, or a princess in the palace, or a fairy in heaven, Li Xian would probably believe it. Some men are simply born with such confidence. Even if they have nothing to offer, even if they are utterly despicable, they still believe they deserve everything in the world, and that all women should naturally admire them. Li Xian is one of those men. In his eyes, he is irresistibly charming, and no woman can resist him. My clumsy lie didn't raise a single eyebrow. He was convinced he was about to become a Prince Charming, until the prefect threw the note in front of him, accusing officials of corruption and slandering an innocent woman. The prefect slammed the gavel. An additional charge. Bring him down and flog him 100 times. No matter how much Li Xian screamed and begged for mercy, the blows fell without mercy. After 100 strokes, he was half dead. When Li Xian came to, he found himself in the dilapidated Li mansion. Husband and wife are like birds of a feather, but when disaster strikes, they fly apart. All his concubines had long since fled. The only one left was Lu Yunyuan. True feelings are revealed in times of adversity. Li Xian shed 2 tears. Today I finally realize that you, Yan are the one who truly loves me. Once my injuries are healed, I will marry you as my legitimate wife. Lu Yunyan gave a dry laugh. In a corner where Li Xian couldn't see her, she rolled her eyes. She would have liked to escape with the others. But most of the other concubines in the mansion had their hometowns nearby, and they could return to find their families after leaving. At worst, she could return to her former brothel and resume her old trade. But she had come all the way from the capital city to this place. Returning was out of the question. To simply find another brothel and resume her old life was something she could not bring herself to do. Thus, she decided to take a gamble. Although Li Xian was now in disgrace, he still held a title of honor. Who knew when he would rise again? If she accompanied him through this difficult time, Li Xian would surely remember her kindness. When he made it big one day, she would rise with him and become a government official's wife. Therefore, Lu Yunyuan endured her disgust and took good care of Li Xian every day. However, she ultimately underestimated Lord Ye's love for his daughter. When Lord Ye learned that there was a womanizer who dared to involve his precious daughter, he was furious. He immediately sent people to investigate Li Xian's life. Soon after, a report was drafted and submitted to the emperor. He had a favorite concubine and abandoned his wife. He was unfilial. He involved himself with officials, and he slandered a woman from a good family. After reading the report, the emperor was disgusted and said, "He has talent but no virtue. He is a petty man. Issue an edict, this man shall never be employed." Thus, Li Xian's long-cherished dream of entering officialdom was completely shattered. After losing all hope of rising to high office, Lu Yunyan no longer bothered to pretend with him and simply turned to leave. Li Xian panicked. He had awakened from his fantasy of having 3 wives and 4 concubines. He knew that if even Lu Yunyan rejected him, he would truly become a lonely old man. He pleaded with Lu Yunyan to stay. He swore on his life that even if he didn't become an official, he would still provide her with a life of luxury and comfort. Using his silver tongue, he finally managed to convince her to stay. After that, Li Xian indeed kept his word and began to diligently seek a livelihood. He actually managed to find one. Although Li Xian had poor character, he was indeed quite learned. After all, he had passed the imperial examination. Many wealthy families specifically hired him to teach at their clan schools. However, due to his poor reputation, his salary was only half that of other teachers. Nevertheless, it was enough to provide for his wife and himself. But for Lu Yunyan, who was accustomed to a life of extravagance, merely having enough to eat and wear was far from enough to satisfy her. Compared to her life when she first entered the Li mansion, let alone her days in the brothel, her current circumstances were far from what she had once known. Lu Yunyuan hated Li Xian for being unable to provide her with a better life. Yet she couldn't bear to leave. This wasn't because she still had feelings for Li Xian, but because, no matter how poor he was, he could at least provide her with a roof over her head and food on the table. If she left recklessly, her fate might be even worse. But continuing to live this way wasn't a solution either. After a while, Lu Yunyuan secretly started working as a prostitute. She took advantage of Li Xian's absence when he was teaching at the clan school to bring clients home. She secretly hid the silver she earned and used it to buy clothes, jewelry, and delicate pastries. With this extra income, life was finally a little better. However, the good times did not last long. Li Xian began to notice that he was developing one pimple after another. Terrified, he sought out a doctor, only to receive an answer he couldn't accept. Syphilis. But he hadn't been with any women in ages. Could it be? With a heavy heart, Li Xian carefully examined his wife. He suddenly realized that Lu Yunyuan, who had been so lazy at home that she didn't even bother to comb her hair, had recently started looking radiant again, applying makeup and rouge. Li Xian's expression darkened. The next day, he pretended to go to the clan school but returned after half an hour. Sure enough, he heard unspeakable sounds outside the door. "You slut!" All the past events flooded back to him. If it weren't for this woman, he wouldn't have divorced his wife. He wouldn't have been accused of filial disobedience by his mother. He wouldn't have ruined his career. And he certainly wouldn't have contracted syphilis. He should have had a brilliant future. But it had all been ruined by this woman. Listening to the loud voices inside, Li Xian's eyes gradually turned red. He walked into the kitchen like a zombie, picked up the knife on the cutting board, and kicked open the door. He then charged toward the figures on the bed and swung the knife at them. Die! Die! With his final blow, he struck his own throat. I took Li's mother with me and continued on our way. I had no parents, and she had abandoned her son. We were both alone in the world. And after all these years together, our bond had grown deep. I decided to take her as my adoptive mother. To others, we claimed to be biological mother and daughter, heading to another region to seek refuge with relatives. Miss, where are we going? Xiaotang thought I would find a quiet, secluded place to live in seclusion. However, I had other plans in mind. My entire life had been confined to a small backyard. Now that I had the chance to leave, I wanted to travel the world. But I was just a powerless merchant's daughter. Traveling with a large sum of money would only make me a target for those with ulterior motives. Therefore, it is best to play it safe for now. Your husband has returned. But the more remote the place, the more powerful and unscrupulous people there are. If we encounter bad people who want to snatch our money, we will have no one to turn to for help. On the other hand, the more prosperous the place, the more laws and regulations there are, and the safer it is. Therefore, we will go to the capital. Under the emperor's rule, there are wealthy families everywhere. I doubt anyone would take an interest in an ordinary woman like me. Moreover, I have long admired the prosperity and splendor of the imperial capital. I have also consulted the servants who once followed me. Those who wished to go to the capital, I took with me. Those who wanted to stay in their hometown, I returned their indentures to them. In the end, about 10 people followed me to the capital. I purchased a residence and leased 2 shops. They need not be too large, I do not rely on them for income, but merely to occupy myself in my spare time. After settling in, I began my reclusive life in the most bustling part of the capital. The capital had beautiful scenery, fine wine, and beautiful women. In spring there were flowers. In autumn there was the moon. In summer there was cool breeze. And in winter there was snow. If there were no worries on one's mind, it was a good time to be alive. From then on, the sea was vast for fish to leap. and the sky was high for birds to fly.